Hello everyone and welcome to Traffic Corner Tuesday. My name is Nancy Crow and I'm the Vice President of Marketing for SPAC Consulting and your host for today's session. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone of a couple housekeeping details. Please mute your mics. Muting your mics to minimize the background noise will help all of the attendees hear our presenters today. Also, join the conversation. Today's presentation is intended to be an interactive dialogue. I would encourage all of the attendees to feel free to ask questions or share your experience throughout the presentation. You don't need to wait till the end. Just type your questions or comments in the chat area and we will address your message during the presentation. Finally, I want to, before I introduce our speakers, I would like to take a moment to thank you for participating in today's session. We started these webinars as a way to share our expertise with others in the industry. We received a lot of positive feedback about these sessions, and with each new session we have seen a growing number of participants. If you find these presentations interesting, I would encourage you to explore our blog, Mike on Traffic. We publish new transportation-related articles each week featuring project case studies, how-to articles, and industry news. Also take a moment to visit SPAC Academy. Our presenters today, Mike Spack and Bryant Fiesick, have created a variety of traffic engineering tools designed to improve your productivity and your bottom line. So finally, why don't we move into our presenters, and I'd like to introduce today's presenters, Mike Spack. He is the president of SPAC Consulting and is the recognized industry leader of traffic studies. He is a graduate of the University of Minnesota, past president of the North Central section of the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and a fellow of the Institute of Transportation Engineers. Since 1996, Mike has led over 1,000 traffic engineering projects. During the past 2 decades, Mike has founded 4 companies, including SPAC Consulting, and he is the creative force and principal writer of the industry-leading blog, Mike on Traffic. He is an accomplished author with articles published in industry publications as well as several industry manuals that are used by engineers around the world. Our second presenter is Bryant Fiesick. Bryant is the Vice President of SPAC Consulting, and he is also widely known in the transportation industry, having managed more than 700 traffic engineering projects. Bryant is a graduate of the University of Minnesota. He is an expert in Synchro, SimTraffic, Vistro, and vSim traffic modeling software packages and thrives on developing creative solutions to traffic and transportation issues. Bryant is a regular contributor to Mike on Traffic blog, a published author in the industry publications, as well as co-author of several industry manuals with Mike. Please welcome Mike and Bryant, our presenters for today.
Hi all, thanks Nancy. Happy to be with you again, and just to remind everyone, today's webinar is being brought to you by SPAC Enterprise, which is these half a dozen different organizations, and if you haven't checked out our blog at Mike on Traffic, I hope you will, but I assume that's how most of you have found us. And with me today is Bryant Fiesick, as Nancy mentioned.
Hello, good to be here.
And so last week we did top changes in the HCM6 that every traffic engineer should know about, and if you haven't seen that, the video is out on YouTube and I believe it will be posted to the blog in the next week or two, so check that out if you missed it. We got a lot of great feedback on that one. Today we're going to be talking about permanent versus temporary traffic control for recurring events. In our last series last month, we did a temporary traffic control for kind of annual events, and that was mostly related to temporary traffic control, where today we're going to be diving more into the permanent versus temporary aspects. And then we'll be back after the holidays, back when January 10th, with talking about unwarranted stop signs and traffic signals, excuse me, and how to go about successfully removing them, which can be a challenge.
All right, so just briefly, like Mike said, overview today, we're looking at what's the line, what's the difference between our permanent improvements and temporary ones. What are the ones we're going to build on the rock and have them be there forever, and which ones are like the shifting sands. So All right, so reoccurring event types. So lots of different things could fall into this category. They're usually not considered typical. They have just non-peak times, very defined entry and exit times. They can be stuff like that. So just kind of going through our events. First one, just your standard concerts. You got the big, could be arenas, could be smaller venues, but you've got a lot of people arriving right before the start, and then concert gets over, out they go. So could be concerts, plays, anything in that type of nature.
But typically a more physical place like a theater or a venue that's going to be having these events multiple times a year, I would say, Brian?
Yes.
Okay. And that kind of leads into the next one, which would be a church, which typically either Saturday night at some types of churches, mosques, synagogues are getting into Sunday mornings. But again, they're recurring on a weekly basis.
State fairs, county fairs, other things can be another type where they would typically only happen once per year, but they occur over multiple days. In this case, the Minnesota State Fair, we'll talk more about this later, but this happens over 12 days. So lots of people coming and going on that one. And then finally, just sporting events, whether it's college or pro, they have a set schedule, but these are very big events that happen, could be a handful of times a year, could be 20, 30 times a year, depending on what it is. You've got a lot of people, again, coming beforehand, leaving in large groups. All right, so for the guidance, as we start to look at where is that line between permanent and temporary, this is the design guidance for the design hourly volume. So this is how we determine what we're going to look at. So you can see in kind of the orange gold lines there, we've got 30. So over all the hours of the day, what we are typically looking for is that 30th highest hour. So on this graph from MnDOT, we're showing kind of the curves based on traffic for the different types of roadways. So freeways, rural routes, different types. You can see how all of them are pretty flat until you get towards the end, and then they ramp up rapidly as a percent of the average annual daily traffic.
So this chart is from MnDOT, Minnesota DOT, but I believe there's a similar one in the AASHTO Green Book.
Yep.
So same concept. So this should be a national standard / concept we're working with.
Yeah, many DOTs will have a similar sort of thing here, and the idea is we want to provide for most of the traffic, most of the typical volumes. So when we start to hit that high curve part of the graph, we're getting into areas that are not routine and start to become too expensive to build for all that. So that starts to define where we start looking at temporary versus permanent, is if you look at that 30th hour.
So along with that 30th hour, when we're looking on a normal roadway, normal intersection, that 30th hour isn't on the weekends, isn't on the middle of the day. It's typically a normal Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday during the PM peak hour is typical. That's why most studies focus in on the evening peak hour as their design hour. But you can get outstate here in Minnesota where going up north, we call it, going to lake country, going to the cabins. Those can peak on a Friday afternoon, evening, going out of town, or on a Sunday evening coming back into town. So there are different alternatives there. And as we discussed around those different venues, the churches, the arenas, the theaters, those can happen outside of the normal weekday peak hours.
So some other factors we consider as we start to look at this are, we've got 3 bullets listed there, the frequency of the event. So is this something like the state fair here that happens 12 days? Is it something like a church or synagogue that happens once a week? What is that frequency of the event, and how often are you having to accommodate this crowd of people coming?
So the 30th design hour, if it's just a one-time event for a couple of hours, obviously that's not the 30th design hour. But at a church that's happening every Sunday morning, that could become that 30th design hour.
Yeah.
So that's what this is getting at. And something like a state fair is starting to straddle that line if it's happening, or a county fair that might go on for a weekend, or depending how busy it is, or some type of amphitheater event that happens half a dozen times a year. But that's usually our starting point, is this 30th hour concept.
Another thing we consider as we start looking at permanent versus temporary is just the percent change from existing traffic. So as we look at this event, is it a small city festival compared to a state fair? Is it a small church that may only have less than 100 people attending, or is it a mega church where they've got several thousand attending? So what's that change from existing traffic? How much are we trying to deal with? Goes right along with that frequency as we start looking at those two.
In the frequency and the percent change play into kind of the edge cases where you may want them to pave a shoulder that could be used if you put a traffic cop out there as a turn lane or a bypass lane, or beef up a gravel shoulder so you can have some temporary, it's there year round, but it can be utilized for the event. Gets into that edge cases.
Mm-hmm. And then the last bullet we have there, existing operations. So this can play into if you've got a failing intersection already, just in your normal day-to-day operation, well then obviously you want to make some improvements, but now you start considering is there an improvement that will help your day-to-day as well as this, as well as these events. So that's always another thing we look at, trying to figure out that day-to-day operation and if it needs help.
Okay, so we want to walk through a couple of case studies. Here is Westwood Community Church. It's technically in Excelsior, Minnesota, and this Highway 41 is a state highway. There is a main intersection down here on the south side that has right and left turn lanes. It's full access. You can even see little medians, but no traffic signal yet. It is set up for a traffic signal. The church is existing. It's been out there for about 20 years. And then up here is a T intersection. You can see there's a right turn lane here, but no left turn lane in. And the way the church currently operates, you can see they're focused up here on the north, and for their services before and after, they hire an off-duty police officer to control traffic, and they set their squad car out there with the lights on for added visibility. And for the most part, they don't have a traffic officer down here, the way the traffic counts split out. So we were brought in a couple of years ago because they're going to expand the sanctuary, basically double it over to here and add parking down here a little bit. And so what we did was we got out there and we took traffic counts for the existing services and then factored up those counts based on the added seats in the sanctuary. So proportion up the counts. And then we ran, we got into sim traffic. At the time we weren't using vStro and vSim, and I'm not sure that we would go to vSim for this. Sim traffic is a little bit easier to use, but we ran all these 15-minute scenarios of with the church. You get really peak events of people coming and going, and we ran sim traffic to see how far the backups would be. And coming out of this, there was the physical infrastructure out here. There was shoulders out here so they could kind of use it as a bypass lane. We ended expanding the hours, the time periods that the traffic cops were supposed to be out there, and we added one down here, and we wanted to make sure we were monitoring, so we had a feedback loop with the police officers at these two intersections. We knew we needed the one up here, and we knew we needed expanded hours. Down here at the southern intersection, it was let's put them out there and let's monitor it for a couple of months. The church opted not to bring us in. Churches, my experience with churches is even mega churches have very limited budgets, and so they're always trying to squeeze things and use volunteers and do as much as they can on their own. But they did have a feedback loop with the off-duty police officers that were posted out there, so they could adjust the times. But this is a case where there was already that physical infrastructure we talked about. We ran the warrant analysis down here, and we didn't think it was time. We didn't think this church would trigger the need for a traffic signal down here, and the roadway system was definitely set up. So the traffic signal will go here one day, the way the spacing of the intersections worked. It would be much more advantageous for the overall transportation system to be down here at 78th Street versus up here at 10 Aduna Drive. So that was really the outcome of where we took that type of analysis, because this is a busy state highway. Going back to our 3 criteria, it wasn't a big percentage change of how things operate, and the 30th design hour out here is during a normal weekday, certainly for the through traffic on the highway, and as residential develops over here, that would be the driving case. There's a lot of residential over here, and that's been built out more. But we did really get into the nitty-gritty of when the police officers should be out there. That's where this study ended up. And feel free to ask any questions in the chat as we go along. We are monitoring that. But seeing none, we'll move on to the next example.
All right, so like I mentioned, we're going to talk about the state fair here. So the fairgrounds are really in the middle here. This is in a suburb of St. Paul called Falcon Heights, right on the border with St. Paul. But you can see it's in a heavy residential area. You can see tons of houses all the way around. This area over here is actually part of the University of Minnesota campus, so they're right next door as well, but kind of got the fairgrounds right in the middle of all this. So like we mentioned, this is a 12-day event. There's about 2 million people last year that attended over the 12 days, so lots of people coming and going to this event. So we helped out, and I'll show you some of the things they're doing. We didn't come up with all these ideas. Some of these have been worked in over the years as they've improved, but we also tried to offer our guidance and help them further improve that as this attendance keeps going up. So one of the main items, they do have on-site parking in these orange yellow areas here. So different parkings, there is an access and in between coming on this side, and then one up to the north. So both those coming in, and then they wrap around to these other parking areas. So those are the 2 main entrances coming in. So we did, when we worked with them, we did counts at both of these. We were out there looking at operations and trying to figure out how is everything coming in, how are people doing that. So there's a very heavy load at the beginning. This is limited parking, so it tends to fill up very quickly. People tend to stack up waiting for it to open in the morning. So one of the things we looked at and they're using well is just reversible lanes. So this is more of a typical commuter where you have a lot of people in the morning. There is some turnover during the day, but then at night you'll see more of that exiting. People tend to stay there a long time. So right away they've got, I believe it's 4 lanes for each of these coming in. So in the morning you have 3 lanes coming in and 1 out. During the day they switch it to 2 and 2, and then at night they switch it so it's 3 outbound lanes to try to keep that traffic moving. And they do it very simply, just using cones to separate the traffic and keep people moving that way.
And the vast majority of people who do come to the State Fair come with some type of transit. The State Fair has done a great job over the last 50 years of moving towards park and rides and commuter buses in addition to regular route buses. So it's been evolving from when I was a kid and everybody tried to drive in to the majority of people now coming in from mass transit.
This is paid parking, so one of the other suggestions we had is as people come in, they have to pay for the parking. They used to pay for their tickets to the fair itself at the same time. So one of the things we suggested is first, if you can move the tickets somewhere else, so they're not trying to figure out how many people are in the car, how many tickets do you need, trying to do math in their heads basically. All that takes time, and meanwhile cars are stacking up behind. So we suggested that they take their tickets to an on-site, so go ahead, make them park, pay for parking, and then come to the gate entrances, wherever they may be, and pay for your tickets there. Another one we suggested too, which they have not implemented, is making your parking fee divisible by 5. It's easier to make change that way rather than trying to count out single dollar bills. And right now I believe the fee is $13 to park, so
Per vehicle.
Per vehicle. So most people probably have 20s. They hand a 20 and the person taking the money has to count out 7 back. So if they switched it to 15, it's just you exchange of 2 bills and you move on. So those are a couple things to move on. As we looked at the outside infrastructure though, these are built up areas. So these are 4-lane divided, they have turn lanes. So really for this there really weren't additional permanent changes to make in that area. This one is controlled by a signal, so they do have that permanent signals already there. Let's see if I get my next one here. Oh, yeah. I didn't mention it, but at the north one they do have officer control up here, and as we look at that volume, the traffic coming in and out there is virtually nothing during the rest of the time. This is really an entrance for the state fair. There really isn't much traffic, so there's no need for other permanent solutions there.
Yeah, we should say at different times in the past, and I don't know if they still have one on the south side, but they have brought in temporary traffic signals on their busier routes, but I believe they've switched over to all officers controlling it to give them much more dynamic control. And to leave it alone when traffic is flowing okay. As Bryant mentioned, really the parking here is almost all day parking, so there isn't the need for traffic control in the middle of the day.
I pointed out officer control down here. This is another one that has an existing permanent signal in this area. This is a major road headed to the east. But with this residential area, you will get people who try to park back in this area. This is the main gate to the state fair. Along this road here, there is also space for transit, so you get a high degree of pedestrians going back and forth. So the officers are there. They're out in the road controlling traffic. They're also controlling the signal, and they're the ones who are basically holding the pedestrians back, making sure everybody crosses at the same time and you don't get stragglers trying to dodge traffic and run through. So officer control there has been a big help. Another item that again was a temporary change for this one. This is an off-ramp with this 4-lane divided to another collector road on the south side of the fair. During the fair, they close this ramp down and change it to a transit-only ramp, so buses can get through there. You also get parking for emergency vehicles. The police will park down here and that. So it's another interesting way to look at it in terms of how you're moving traffic around. And with the parking on the north side and some of the transit over here, they have another transit area on the west side near the parking. There's not that much need for people to go back and forth, although there are some other parking areas there, but they've pretty much shut that down and said we need this to make sure our buses can get through, to make sure the operations down on this major collector still go. So it was a benefit from that standpoint, and it turned into we're going to assume that people can find their way around without that ramp.
And a big change at the fair was on that south side used to be the major bus hub. They switched it over to the northwest portion of the campus up here, and they reconfigured the entrance exit a couple of years ago now to have a much smoother on campus, I would say, way for the buses to operate. And back here there's a transit way, to think along here, that's built for the University of Minnesota to go between their campuses to utilize that more and to try to segregate the different modes of transportation.
And that was a big one that we worked with them and tried to help make that come to realization, because previously when the buses were on the south side, you had a lot of pedestrians crossing this major road here. And there's just a lot of action on that major collector with regular cars to and from the fair, the buses, and then all these pedestrians trying to cross. So by essentially moving that transit piece internally, there's a major gate back here now. People can get off the bus right in. There's no conflicts. So we were able to eliminate those conflicts. Mike had mentioned this before, how much they're promoting transit at the State Fair. This map on the left side, you can see kind of the outline of the fairgrounds. All these numbered dots are where they have park and ride lots. So they have really increased the number that are available, really promoted transit, and provided those lots for free, basically. So you can drive close, you can park, you can hop on a bus, and you're right to the fair. So that's been part of their way to reduce that traffic.
So as we wind down the last few minutes here, the temporary options we like to go through, and again, it's getting back to that percentage of traffic and 30th design hour. Obviously, police officer control is very temporary, non-intrusive. You can make adjustments. So that's usually our starting point for any event or even a mega church. But then as we go down the list, if there's traffic signals out there, maybe the police officer can take control of the signal, put it in flash, or maybe we can get a different timing plan in for a Sunday morning around a church, things like that. Also designated routes, trying to get people, especially if it's churchgoers or something that's ongoing, the same people, can you somehow get them to balance the system out?
Or I look at it too, if you have two access points, one to the north, one to the south. If you're coming from the south, use the south access. If you're coming from the north, use the north access. Try to avoid that overlapping and interrupting each other's operations, basically. So again, that can be a tough order sometimes, but trying to pull those routes out. Eliminating parking, this is an option that's used on arterials a lot, where you have on-street parking, but during the peak times it's eliminated and it becomes a drive lane. So that can be another option for these events, to just add capacity to a route. You obviously have to balance that with what the event is and where parking is going to be. So again, if you're looking at roadway capacity, that's an option. Median closures, we've had projects before where for the event we turn an intersection into a right in, right out, and we know people are going to go a mile down the road and make a U-turn, but that's safer than trying to take a left right at the access point. So that becomes, again, if it's a temporary closure, you can do it with barrels and put them out there for the event. If it's an ongoing close to that 30th where you know you're going to be dealing with this a lot, maybe it's a permanent closure that you make, and then you make it for a safe U-turn down the line.
And that could go the other way, although it'd be much more common to have a median closure than a median opening, but you could build in a median opening, put pylons along it to have it be a closed median most of the time, but if you maybe put a traffic officer out there and it lined up with a driveway into the site, you could create a temporary access with that. And then the last couple one-way traffic routes are pretty self-explanatory, and like we really talked about with the state fair, really honing in on alternative modes can be a huge step, and
Yes.
it just is one of the tools in your toolkit. I do see Ang wants to be the presenter, and we don't typically do that, but if you have any questions, now's a great time to go ahead and put in your questions in the comments, since we are wrapping up here at 1 o'clock. Sorry about that. Benedict, sorry, I'm reading this wrong too. That was a mistake. But last call, looking for questions. Okay, not seeing any. So like I mentioned, we'll be back after the new year, January 10th, and we'll be talking about kind of legacy traffic signal systems and removing unwarranted signals, and some interesting stuff there and the politics involved. Let's see. Okay, not seeing any questions. Thanks everyone, and have a great holiday season. We'll see you back in a few weeks.